What happens when you walk into a place you're told you don't belong? How will you respond? In life, there are moments when our confidence and determination are put to the test. When we walk into spaces we are told we don't belong in, how will we rise above the invisible barriers that try to hold us back? Simone Harper, a black woman, steps into a courthouse dressed in her finest professional attire, ready to start her new role as the city prosecutor. But instead of being welcomed, she's mistaken for an intruder, treated with suspicion, and accused of trespassing simply because of her appearance. When a court clerk calls security to remove her, things begin to escalate. The question becomes, can Simone hold her ground in a system that's not used to seeing someone like her in power? The worst moments seem to unfold, but this is also when Simone must decide. Will she accept this injustice, or will she challenge it head-on? With unwavering confidence and sharp intellect, Simone not only proves her rightful place, but begins a journey that forces the courthouse to confront its deeply rooted biases. Can she bring about real change, or will the system push back against her efforts? Watch this inspiring story to find out. Before we dive into this powerful story, ask yourself, have you ever been underestimated or judged based on who you are? Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of strength and resilience, and let's explore how one woman is rewriting the rules of power and justice. The unexpected intruder. Have you ever been underestimated? Judged before you even had the chance to prove yourself? You've spent years of hard work, building your reputation, earning your title, and carving a path that few others would have the courage to follow. You walk into your workplace, dressed in the finest attire, your confidence undeniable, knowing this day is another step forward in your journey. But then, out of nowhere, someone questions your presence. Not because of what you've done or who you are, but simply because they believe you don't belong. It happens in the blink of an eye, a glance, a look, a word, a misplaced assumption. This is the story of Simone Harper, a woman who, on her first day as the city's new prosecutor, faced the harsh reality of bias, not just from others, but from an entire system she was stepping into. I just walked into my own office and was treated like an intruder. That was Simone's first impression of the courthouse she had spent years preparing for. And what was the reason? The color of her skin, the way she looked, the assumptions that were made about her, the ones that she was never given a chance to prove wrong. Simone had worked tirelessly to get to where she was, but in a moment, all that hard work and achievement became irrelevant in the eyes of the people around her. Let that sink in for a moment. Can you imagine the feeling? How would you react if you walked into a room where you were supposed to feel at home, only to be accused of being an outsider? A trespasser? What happens when your very existence is questioned, not because of your actions, but because of the biases others hold? Simone, a woman who walked into that courthouse full of potential and hope, was immediately greeted with suspicion and hostility. But here's the thing about people like Simone, they don't back down. They refuse to be invisible. Let's take a closer look at that moment. Simone enters the courthouse, her power suit speaking volumes before she even says a word. Her heels echo on the marble floors as she moves with purpose, the weight of her briefcase in hand, a symbol of the work she was about to do. She's not just any new hire. She's the new prosecutor for the city. This is her domain, her career, her time to shine. But there's an invisible wall she doesn't see coming. The moment she approaches the front desk, the court clerk, an older woman, gives her a cold, scrutinizing stare. The clerk doesn't even bother to greet Simone. Instead, her fingers hover over the intercom, ready to call for security. There's an immediate sense of hostility, an instinctive suspicion. This feeling is palpable, the kind of energy you can't miss. It's that unsettling, icy reception that leaves a pit in your stomach. One that sends a message louder than any words could. You don't belong here. Simone offers a simple greeting, good morning. Yet, the clerk's response is harsh and dismissive. This area isn't open to the public, she declares. Imagine hearing that. In your own office, on your first day, with your ID in hand and your credentials ready to prove your place. But it's not about the paperwork. It's about something deeper. The clerk's assumptions are based on something as irrelevant as Simone's appearance. Simone, ever the professional, responds calmly, "Public? I'm here for my first day." She slides her ID across the desk, hoping to clear up the misunderstanding. But the clerk barely even looks at it. Instead, she calls for security. This is where the story begins to take shape, not as a moment of just personal insult, but as a much larger conversation about bias, systemic inequality, and how far we still have to go in creating truly inclusive environments. Simone could have walked away. She could have just left the courthouse, went home, and let it go. But instead, she did something extraordinary. She stood her ground. Why does this matter? We've all faced situations where we've been underestimated. Maybe we've been told we don't have the right qualifications, or that we don't look the part, or even that we don't belong in a particular space. These situations happen daily, often in subtle ways, but they send a clear message. You are not enough. We're used to hearing stories of overcoming obstacles, but Simone's story is different. It's not just about overcoming obstacles on her journey. It's about breaking down barriers others created and dismantling the invisible walls that so often keep certain people out. What would have happened if Simone had let this moment define her? What if she had accepted the clerk's actions as just another mistake or misunderstanding? It would have sent a message that these biases were acceptable, that they could go unchallenged. Instead, Simone made a choice to push back, a choice to demand respect, and not just for herself, but for every person who's ever been in her shoes, who's been told they don't belong. So, let's step back for a moment and think about this. Why do these situations happen in the first place? Is it simply a case of individuals misunderstanding each other? Or is it part of a larger, systemic issue that pervades our workplaces, our justice systems, and even our daily lives? The uncomfortable truth is that the biases Simone faced were not accidental or personal. They were a product of years of ingrained systems and assumptions. This is where the real challenge begins. How do you fight something that isn't just about one person's actions, but about a larger cultural norm that has been silently passed down through generations? And this is the essence of what Simone faced that day. It wasn't just a personal affront. It was a systemic challenge to everything she'd worked for. The courthouse that she had entered with hopes of making a difference was the very same system that had been built on exclusion, on the belief that people like her didn't belong in certain spaces of power. But this is where her story turns, and where it begins to matter far beyond her own experience. Pivotal moment. Security arrives. The officer, as expected, doesn't question the situation. He doesn't give Simone a chance to explain herself, to clarify who she is. He takes one look at her, his eyes scanning her presence, and immediately assumes she's in the wrong. The situation escalates quickly, and Simone knows that her response to this moment will define not just how her first day goes, but potentially how her entire career unfolds. Instead of shrinking back, Simone challenges him, calmly yet firmly. She refuses to lower her voice. She refuses to accept the role they've tried to assign her. The intruder. Her voice rings out clearly, "I have every right to be here." At that moment, she knows there is no going back. The battle within, breaking barriers and challenging the system. Simone's experience at the courthouse was more than just a moment of personal discomfort. It was the beginning of something far more significant, a confrontation with not just individual bias, but with an entire system that perpetuates exclusion. What happened in that hallway wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a broader, ingrained culture of discrimination that affects people of all backgrounds, genders, and ethnicities, especially in professional settings. But why did this happen to Simone? Why was she, as a highly qualified, confident individual, treated like an outsider on her very first day? To answer this, we need to explore two major factors that contributed to this interaction: systemic bias and unconscious discrimination. Systemic bias. The invisible wall. Systemic bias is a concept that's often difficult for people to grasp. It's not about one individual's prejudice, but about a larger set of practices, norms, and policies that perpetuate inequality. These biases exist in our institutions, in the very fabric of society, and often go unnoticed until someone like Simone, who challenges the status quo, comes along. In the case of Simone, the courthouse represented a traditional, hierarchical institution. As a prosecutor, she was stepping into a field dominated by older generations, most of whom still held deeply ingrained ideas about who should belong in certain positions of power. Even though Simone had earned her position through hard work and dedication, the system itself wasn't designed to welcome someone like her. But Simone didn't just face resistance from her immediate colleagues. She faced a wider, systemic issue. This resistance wasn't just individual prejudice, but the culmination of years of cultural norms that dictated who gets to succeed and who doesn't. Let's pause and reflect. How many people have walked into similar environments, only to feel like they don't belong because they don't fit into the preconceived mold? When Simone was questioned by the court clerk, that wasn't just one person's fault. It was an example of the invisible barriers that exist within institutions. These biases aren't written in the rulebook, but they are felt in every interaction, every look, and every subtle judgment passed on people who look or act differently. Unconscious bias. When prejudice is invisible. While systemic bias is often easy to spot, unconscious bias is more insidious. It operates under the radar, influencing decisions and actions without anyone even realizing it. In Simone's case, the court clerk didn't consciously decide to challenge her presence. It was an automatic reaction, the result of years of cultural conditioning. Unconscious bias often manifests in workplace environments in ways that we don't even recognize. For example, think about the last time you entered a meeting, a room full of colleagues, or even a social gathering. Did you ever notice a pattern in how people interact with each other based on gender, race, or appearance? Research on unconscious bias shows that we tend to favor people who are more similar to ourselves, whether it's in terms of background, appearance, or experiences. It's human nature to feel more comfortable with the familiar, but this bias often leads to exclusion of people who don't fit these invisible norms. Simone, as a black woman in a male-dominated, predominantly white field, immediately stood out. Whether people were aware of it or not, her mere presence challenged their unspoken ideas of what a prosecutor should look like. This creates an ongoing challenge for many people in similar positions. How can you succeed when the system isn't designed to support you? How can you break through when people are judging you based on stereotypes that have been cultivated over generations? Real-life stories of overcoming bias. While Simone's story is fictional, it echoes the lived experiences of many real people who face discrimination and bias in their careers. Take, for example, the story of Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, a renowned psychologist and author, who writes about the difficulties she faced as an African-American woman in academia. In her book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?, Dr. Tatum describes how, as a professor, she was constantly overlooked, her contributions diminished, and her presence dismissed. Despite having more credentials and qualifications than most of her colleagues, she was still treated as less than. Dr. Tatum's experience mirrors Simone's in a way. Both women had the qualifications, the ability, and the drive to succeed. Yet, because they didn't conform to the established norms of their environments, they had to constantly prove their worth and push through bias to be seen as equals. Another example comes from Maya Angelou, one of the most influential writers of the 20th century, who faced not only racism but also sexism in her career. In her memoir, she speaks about the numerous doors that were closed to her because of the way she looked and the assumptions people made about her. Yet, despite these barriers, she continued to rise above them, redefining what it meant to be a woman, a writer, and a black voice in America. These real-life examples show us that overcoming bias is never easy, but it's possible. The key lies in recognizing these biases for what they are: barriers that can be broken through with persistence, self-belief, and the support of others. The importance of representation in leadership. So, how can Simone break through the invisible walls she's facing? How can she overcome the systemic and unconscious biases that have been built into the system? Representation matters. Studies show that when people see leaders who look like them, they're more likely to believe that they, too, can succeed. But representation isn't just about having diverse faces at the table. It's about creating an environment where these individuals feel valued, supported, and heard. Simone's challenge was never just about proving she was qualified. It was about reshaping the narrative of what a prosecutor should look like and what it means to succeed in such a role. In this sense, her fight wasn't only personal. It was an act of resistance against the system that had long excluded people like her. Simone's response to the clerk, to the security guard, and to every other barrier she encountered was a statement of power. I belong here. And she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. The role of allies and advocates. But as Simone quickly learned, fighting the system alone is never enough. The key to truly breaking down these barriers lies in collective action. Allies, people who understand the power dynamics at play a crucial role in supporting individuals like Simone. Imagine if, when the security guard arrived at the scene, one of Simone's colleagues had stepped forward and said, "No, she belongs here. Let her through." What would that moment have looked like? It's crucial that we all take responsibility for creating inclusive environments. In workplaces, schools, and other institutions, we must step up when we witness bias in action. We must be the ones to say, "This isn't right," even if it's uncomfortable. Without allies, the burden of fighting bias falls squarely on the shoulders of the marginalized. Simone's journey was tough, but it would have been even harder if she hadn't had the support of a few key allies who recognized her worth, saw the systemic issues at play, and stepped in to help. Allies provide a sense of solidarity that's critical in the battle for equity. The turning point, making her voice heard. As Simone continued to navigate the obstacles in her path, she realized that breaking the system wasn't a one-time event. It was a series of moments, a collection of conversations, decisions, and actions that would eventually lead to lasting change. The day she stood up to the security guard wasn't the end of her struggle. It was the beginning. As she proved time and time again, the more you challenge the system, the more it begins to shift. But this requires perseverance, grit, and an unwavering belief in your right to succeed. What can we take away from Simone's story? It's clear. The fight against systemic bias and unconscious discrimination isn't easy, and it won't be won overnight. But the more people like Simone rise up and demand their place, the more that system begins to change. In the next section, we'll explore the steps that Simone took to not only break down these walls for herself, but to start challenging the status quo, building alliances, and fighting for long-term change in the justice system. Stay tuned. The real battle is just beginning. The path forward, transforming challenges into change. Simone's journey didn't end with that single moment at the courthouse. In fact, it was only the beginning of a long, often painful, but ultimately transformative process. After facing blatant bias on her first day, Simone had a choice to make. She could allow the systemic barriers, the unconscious biases, and the microaggressions to defeat her, or she could rise above them and use them as fuel to create meaningful change, not just for herself, but for others who would follow in her footsteps. Simone chose the latter, and that decision would go on to shape not just her career, but the careers of many others in the system who faced the same struggles. The courage to challenge the system head-on was what ultimately transformed Simone into a trailblazer, one who proved that representation matters and that the fight for equality isn't just about being seen. It's about being heard, being respected, and being empowered to bring about long-lasting change. But what exactly can we learn from Simone's story? How can we apply these lessons to our own lives and work to dismantle the systems of bias and discrimination that still exist today? Let's break it down. 1. Recognizing and acknowledging bias, the first step toward change. The first step in transforming systemic bias is recognizing it. For Simone, this meant understanding that the dismissive attitude from the security guard wasn't a personal attack. It was a symptom of a much larger issue. We live in a world that's deeply entrenched in historical and cultural biases, and while these biases aren't always obvious, they still have a profound effect on people's lives. Whether it's in the workplace, in social situations, or in institutions like the courtroom, recognizing when bias is at play is the first crucial step toward dismantling it. This means that every time we walk into a room or engage in a conversation, we must be aware of the underlying assumptions that might exist. Who is being included? Who is being excluded? Who's given the benefit of the doubt, and who's automatically judged? By acknowledging bias, we begin to create an environment in which it becomes easier to address. It's important to ask ourselves, what biases am I holding on to? And how might they be affecting the way I see others and the decisions I make? This self-reflection is uncomfortable but necessary. For Simone, it wasn't just about recognizing the bias against her. It was about recognizing the biases she too might hold and then confronting them head-on. 2. Persistence, the power of resilience. Simone's perseverance was key to overcoming the challenges that came her way. Every time she was told she didn't belong, every time she was dismissed or underestimated, she fought back. Not with anger, but with action. She focused on doing her job to the best of her ability, proving through her work that she belonged in that space, that she had earned her seat at the table. This resilience, this unshakable belief in herself, was what eventually turned the tide in her favor. But it wasn't just about toughing it out. Simone recognized that to create real, lasting change, she couldn't simply survive within the system. She had to challenge it. She had to hold up a mirror to the system, forcing it to confront its own flaws. And that's where resilience plays a critical role. It's not just about enduring hardship, it's about pushing against the very structures that try to hold you back. For Simone, this meant using her position to mentor others, to speak out against bias when she saw it, and to stand as a living example of what was possible when barriers were broken down. 3. The role of allyship, moving beyond tolerance to advocacy. One of the most important lessons from Simone's journey is the vital role that allies play in breaking down systems of discrimination. Throughout her story, Simone didn't just fight her battles alone. She leaned on others, colleagues, mentors, and even some members of the community who had the courage to stand by her side. In the early days, when Simone was still learning the ropes of her new role, allies within the court system helped her navigate the challenges. These individuals, whether they were consciously aware of their role as allies or not, were crucial in helping her gain access, opportunities, and respect. Allyship is more than just being non-racist. It's about being actively anti-racist, actively anti-sexist, and actively anti-discriminatory. It's about stepping up when you see someone being marginalized and lending your voice to the cause. Allies must amplify the voices of those who are often silenced, and this can make all the difference in whether an individual thrives or simply survives within a biased system. Simone's allies weren't just her colleagues who supported her career. They were also the ones who spoke up against the prejudices and inequalities she faced, whether inside the courtroom or beyond. By having these individuals in her corner, Simone was able to challenge the status quo more effectively, knowing she wasn't facing the battle alone. 4. Representation, shaping the future. Perhaps the most important takeaway from Simone's experience is the power of representation. Representation is not just about filling quotas or checking boxes. It's about seeing people who look like you, who share your background and experiences, in roles of power and influence. Simone's ultimate success wasn't just about breaking personal barriers. It was about paving the way for others like her. As a trailblazer, she understood that her presence in that courtroom wasn't just for her own advancement. It was a testament to the fact that the system could change. For many people, especially those from marginalized communities, seeing someone like Simone in a powerful position gives them the belief that they, too, can break barriers. Representation is about creating a future where everyone, regardless of their background, feels that they belong and that they have the opportunity to rise to the top. Simone didn't just climb the ladder for herself. She made sure the ladder was there for others to follow. 5. Redefining success, success on your own terms. As Simone's journey progressed, she realized that success didn't look like what the system told her it should. It wasn't about conforming to the old standards or fighting to be accepted in a world that wasn't built for her. Instead, success became about defining her own terms. This lesson is crucial. In a world where the concept of success is often narrowly defined, based on appearance, conformity, or meeting societal expectations, it's important to redefine what success means for you. Simone's ability to set her own benchmarks, to create her own path, was the ultimate victory. For her, success wasn't about fitting into a mold. It was about breaking that mold, shaping it, and using her experience to carve out space for others who might face the same obstacles. Conclusion: a legacy of change. Simone's story serves as both a personal triumph and a call to action for those of us who are still working to break down barriers in our own lives and careers. While the fight for equality and inclusion is ongoing, the lessons we've learned from Simone's journey can help guide us on our own paths. We must continue to confront bias, challenge systemic oppression, and advocate for those who don't have the power to speak up. And most importantly, we must support each other in this fight. Because while it's easy to feel like the system is too big to change, it's the collective power of individuals working together that will ultimately reshape the world for the better. Simone's fight was difficult, but it wasn't in vain. She made sure her presence, her success, and her fight for justice would be felt for generations to come. She may have faced unimaginable obstacles, but she never let them define her. And through her resilience, advocacy, and unwavering commitment to change, Simone showed us that it's possible to overcome the impossible. As you walk away from this video, ask yourself, what are you doing to break the barriers around you? How can you be a part of the solution? And how will you, like Simone, pave the way for future generations? The journey is long, but it starts with each of us. Let's keep pushing forward. Together. Final thoughts. Simone's story is a powerful reminder of the courage it takes to not just survive, but thrive in an unjust world. It's a story about breaking barriers, challenging systemic norms, and leading by example. It's a story that speaks to every one of us, regardless of background or profession, and calls on us to take a stand against bias, to support those who need it, and to redefine what success really means. By reflecting on Simone's experience and learning from it, we can each contribute to a more inclusive and just society, one step at a time.